Right now, you probably think you're actively choosing to listen to this. You open the app, you tapped play, you're deciding to pay attention.
Yeah, it feels like total autonomy, right?
Exactly, like driving a car. You
Yeah.
turn the steering wheel left, car goes left. You decide to be productive, you act productive. It's very clean, very one-to-one.
Right. It's a really comforting illusion. I mean, we all walk around assuming we're the drivers, making these fully conscious decisions in real time, like we're completely in control of the vehicle.
But what if that steering wheel you're holding isn't actually connected to the tires?
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like what if the choices you think you're making today are actually being executed by, I don't know, a piece of psychological legacy software? Something that was installed without your permission when you were, say, 14 years old.
Which is a genuinely jarring premise. The idea that you aren't actually living your life, you're being lived by invisible systems.
It's wild. But that is our mission for today. Welcome to part one of a special double feature deep dive. We were exploring this massive, groundbreaking framework about becoming the architect of your own meaning.
Yeah, and today is really all about the blueprints, right? The systems phase.
Exactly. We're looking at chapters 0 through 4 today. We're going to transition you from being a passive user of your life to becoming the active architect of it. We are getting root access to your mind.
And that requires a fundamental shift in where we focus our attention, because today's journey is about moving from the user interface, the UI, our daily anxieties, the surface level thoughts, the endless to-do lists.
Right, the stuff we obsess over.
Yeah, moving from that UI down into the foundational operating system, the core OS.
Let's really dig into that UI versus OS concept because I feel like it perfectly captures the modern condition. Think about your smartphone. You spend all your time interacting with the icons.
Tapping the glass?
Right. You tap the weather app, you open your email, you check your calendar. You never, ever actually look at the millions of lines of binary code that make those icons appear. And this framework we're exploring today points out that we do the exact same thing with our own minds.
We really do. I mean, people spend 95% of their waking lives just staring at the desktop icons of their brain.
And those mental desktop icons are, what, your repetitive thoughts, your schedule?
Exactly. Your schedules, the metrics you use to measure your worth. We spend almost 100% of our energy managing those icons, organizing them, stressing over them.
Yeah.
And we spend exactly 0% of our time looking at the underlying code that generated those specific thoughts and anxieties in the first place. We're completely divorced from the machine itself.
Which is so true. I mean, think about your average Tuesday morning. You wake up, you immediately grab the phone, you check the weather, well, that's environmental data. You check your email, that's external demands. You check your smartwatch for your sleep score, that's a metric.
You're just frantically navigating a dashboard.
Yes. You're navigating a dashboard, but you aren't actually grounded in your own physical reality.
And so this framework initiates a complete OS update to fix that. And the very first step of debugging your mind's OS is mapping out what is actually running in the background right now.
Which the source material does beautifully. It has this brilliant dashboard of metaphors to help you visualize your internal systems.
Yeah, it categorizes your internal world into distinct functions. So for instance, think of the mind as a streaming service.
Okay.
It's constantly feeding you content, right? Suggesting algorithms based on your past viewing history.
Like your past traumas, your past habits.
Exactly. If you constantly watch anxiety-inducing content, the algorithm just keeps feeding you more anxiety, just cues it up.
Right. And then there's the body. The framework describes the body as a navigation system or a GPS. It's constantly picking up on spatial data, subtle cues in the room, physiological responses.
But we usually have the volume on the GPS completely muted.
We totally ignore it. And then we have emotions, which operate like a weather system. They roll in, they change the atmosphere, and they roll out. And identity, this one is huge. Identity is framed as a gaming console.
This is a crucial one, because most of us are just playing life with the starter character we were handed at birth.
I want to spend a second on that because that starter character usually comes equipped with all the fears and limitations of our parents, right? Our hometowns, our early failures. And we just accept it. We never realized we could go into the character creation menu and rebuild our avatar.
We just think, well, this is who I am. And then, of course, we rely on our habits, which the text compares to a smart home.
Oh, yeah, the smart home. The lights turn on automatically when you walk in. Your anxiety spikes automatically when your boss emails you. It's all just automated.
Right. And finally, life itself is described as a playlist on shuffle. You never know what track is coming next, but you have to learn how to dance to it.
It's an incredibly comprehensive way to map human psychology. But the danger of not understanding these systems, the danger of staying stuck purely in the UI, just staring at the screen, is a state called disembodiment.
Yes, and modern life is essentially a highly funded, technologically advanced training camp for abandoning the body.
Wow, yeah.
We live almost entirely in thoughts about life rather than actually experiencing life itself.
And this is where the trap really springs shut, I think. Because someone listening might be thinking, hold on, I'm very in touch with myself. I track my macros, I monitor my resting heart rate, I use a meditation app to track my mindful minutes. I know exactly what's going on.
But in this architecture, those are called external audits.
Right. We use these external audits to prove to ourselves that we are alive and functioning.
We have entirely outsourced our internal knowing to external devices. We rely on a piece of wearable tech to tell us if our nervous system is recovered. We rely on bank statements to quantify our safety, social media engagement metrics to tell us if we're, socially connected or valued.
It is utterly absurd when you really look at it. It's
Yeah.
like trying to fix a glitching computer by just pressing your finger against the monitor harder.
That's a perfect analogy.
You can't fix a software glitch at the glass screen level, but we do this constantly. Imagine you wake up, you feel totally refreshed, you stretch, you feel great. Then you look at your phone, and your sleep app says you only got a 42 sleep score and terrible REM cycles. Instantly, you feel exhausted.
You literally let a UI element overwrite your actual physical embodied reality.
It's crazy.
And that is the ultimate symptom of a flawed, corrupted operating system. When you trust the external validation and the rigid pre-programmed metrics more than you trust your own internal hardware, your system becomes incredibly fragile.
And to illustrate just how catastrophic a flawed, closed-loop operating system can be, the source material looks at a very stark historical case study.
Yes. To really understand how psychological bugs lead to systemic collapse, the text examines Adolf Hitler's military strategy in World War II.
And we should be very clear here for the listener. We are looking at this purely through the lens of psychological architecture and strategic analysis. We are completely stripping away the politics, not taking any sides or endorsing anything, just impartially reporting on the raw mechanics of his mental OS as laid out in the source text.
Absolutely. From a purely structural standpoint, this is an extreme example of what happens when a leader's internal operating system is corrupted by the concept of supremacy.
Right.
We usually think of supremacy merely as a moral failing, but in the context of system architecture, it is a massive perceptual error. It's a fatal strategic liability. A strategy built on supremacy is guaranteed to fail because the OS is running on rigid delusional assumptions about reality.
And the structural analysis highlights 3 specific bugs in his code. The first bug was the myth of divine infallibility. He genuinely believed he was chosen by fate or providence.
And when you have that line of code running in your head, you completely misinterpret data.
Exactly. A logistical failure like the catastrophic reality of invading Russia in the winter with inadequate supply lines isn't processed as a mechanical error that needs fixing. It's processed as a test of faith. He couldn't read the data accurately because the OS filtered everything through his own infallibility.
The second bug was the fiction of enemy inferiority. The ideology required viewing adversaries as inherently weak.
Right.
And if your operating system demands that your enemy is weak, you become completely blind to reality. This bug blinded his regime to the actual overwhelming industrial manufacturing capacity of the United States. And it blinded them to the vast, almost incomprehensible mobilization capabilities of the Soviet Union. You just cannot prepare for an enemy your OS refuses to see accurately.
It's a closed loop. And the third bug was the illusion of unilateral control. He believed his sheer personal willpower could literally dominate physical reality. This led to frantic micromanagement from the top down and catastrophic no-retreat orders that destroyed entire armies.
Which brings up a brilliant insight from the text regarding what we call empathetic research.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because empathy in this strategic context has absolutely nothing to do with sympathy or compassion, right?
Right. Strategic empathy is the ability to accurately recognize and calculate your adversary's capacity for creativity, resilience, and adaptation. It requires humility.
Yeah.
You have to admit the other side is smart and capable.
Which his OS forbade.
Exactly. Because his OS forbade that kind of humility, he was completely unable to adapt when the reality of the war shifted. Waging war against reality is a war you will always lose.
So bringing this back down to earth, Why does this intense historical case study matter to you, listening on your commute or while walking your dog? Because the mechanics of delusion are exactly the same, just on a different scale.
Absolutely.
If your internal code relies on rigid assumptions about your coworkers, or a sense of superiority over your partner, or, an absolute refusal to look at the cold, hard facts of your financial situation, you are waging war against reality. Debugging your mind means replacing those rigid assumptions with genuine, open curiosity.
You have to transition from a closed system, which only looks for data that confirms its biases, to an open system, which constantly takes in new data and adjusts.
But here is the challenge. Once you recognize that your current OS is buggy and you wipe that legacy software, you face a terrifying new problem.
You're left with a blank hard drive.
Yeah, an empty void. You
Yep.
can't just live in a vacuum. You need a new blueprint to rebuild your internal world so it doesn't collapse again.
Which means we need to pour a new foundation. We need the requisite architecture. The framework calls these the 4 pillars, or the 4DP, and it's crucial to understand that these are load-bearing walls.
Right. This isn't a self-help buffet where you just pick the 2 concepts you vibe with and leave the rest. If you're building a house and you skip one of the 4 foundational pillars, the roof caves in. Period.
So let's construct them one by one. Pillar 1 is truth. But to be clear, not a philosophical abstract truth. This is about radical self-honesty.
Getting real with yourself.
Exactly. It's the active, daily process of escaping self-deception. To do this, you have to recognize the massive gap between your surface self and your core witness.
Okay, break those down.
The surface self is your ego. It's the part of you that rationalizes, projects blame, defends your bad habits, and creates these elaborate excuses. The core witness, on the other hand, is the deeper part of your consciousness that simply observes reality without judgment.
And bridging that gap requires a tool, which the framework calls the wise parent test. I love this. Let's say you've been telling yourself, I just don't have time to work on my novel, or I'm too busy to go to the gym.
The surface self believes that excuse entirely.
Right. And a tyrannical inner voice would scream at you, call you lazy, and shame you, while a permissive inner voice would say, you're right, you're so tired, take a break. And neither helps.
But a wise parent treats the excuse with compassionate firmness. A wise parent doesn't shame the child, but they also don't buy the lie. When you apply this to yourself, you observe the excuse and you ask, are you genuinely logistically out of hours in the day? Or are you just avoiding the discomfort of starting? Are you afraid it won't be good? You don't judge the fear, you just observe the truth of it.
You just strip away the rationalization until you are holding the raw truth. And you absolutely must have that raw truth, because without it, the second load-bearing wall is completely useless, which is pillar 2, target.
Yes, this is a massive shift from relying on rigid plans to utilizing flexible goals. It's about having directional clarity combined with tactical fluidity.
Because most people's legacy software relies heavily on rigid plans. A plan is a highly specific sequence of events that you believe must happen exactly as envisioned. But plans are inherently fragile. Let's use the archer metaphor from the text because it perfectly illustrates the difference between a plan and a goal.
It's a great visual.
Think of an archer standing in a field, aiming at a target painted on a bale of hay. The target itself, your ultimate goal, does not move. It is clear. But when the archer releases the bowstring, that arrow is instantly subjected to reality. It has to contend with a sudden crosswind, changing air pressure, the pull of gravity, maybe a flaw in the fletching of the arrow itself.
Right, and a rigid plan dictates that the arrow must travel in a perfectly straight, mathematically flawless line from the bow to the bullseye. If a crosswind hits, a rigid planner refuses to adjust, shoots straight anyway, misses entirely, and then blames the wind.
It's the wind's fault I missed.
Exactly. A flexible goal, however, acknowledges the wind. The archer adjusts their stance, aims slightly to the left to account for the breeze, and hits the mark.
Because plans shatter the second life happens. You create a perfect 5-year plan for your career, but then the economy crashes, or you have a health crisis, or you suddenly have to care for an aging parent.
Life always interrupts.
Always. And if your OS is built on rigid plans, a disruption isn't just a detour. It registers as a complete failure of your life. You feel like everything is ruined. But if you have a target, a directional goal, it just flexes. You say, okay, the wind just picked up to 40 miles an hour. How do I recalibrate my aim to still hit my ultimate target of financial stability or family well-being?
It creates immense resilience. You stop breaking when the world shifts. And to accurately read those shifts, you need pillar 3.
Totally.
The formal term for this in the text is dimensional homonymy.
Which sounds exactly like the word that eliminates the smartest kid at the National Spelling Bee. Can I have the definition of dimensional homonymy, please?
It really does. It's incredibly dense academic phrasing, but the mechanism behind it is vital and highly practical. Dimensional homonymy means developing the capacity to see all dimensions, all layers of a situation simultaneously, without collapsing them into a single, flat, reactive label.
The smartphone analogy makes this click perfectly. If you were holding your phone right now, ask yourself, what is it? Is it a camera? Yes. Is it a GPS map? Yes. Is it a flashlight, a calculator, a portal to your bank account, a communication device?
It is all of those distinct things simultaneously.
Right. You don't get confused and try to use the flashlight app to call your mother. You understand its multidimensionality. Dimensional homonymy means learning to decode your own inner experiences with that exact same appreciation for complexity.
Apply this to how we process our own biology. Let's say you're walking into a large social gathering, and suddenly you feel a tight chest, shallow breathing, and a racing heart. If you're running on your legacy OS, you immediately collapse all that complex physical data into a single flat label: anxiety.
And your brain says, I'm having anxiety, which triggers a panic response, and suddenly you need to leave the party.
But if you use dimensional homonymy, you pause. You don't collapse the data. You recognize that a tight chest is just a physiological sensation. It is data. It is not automatically an emotion. You ask yourself, is this anxiety? Or is this excitement because I'm about to see friends? Did I just drink a massive iced coffee on an empty stomach? Am I just physically cold?
By meticulously separating the raw physical sensation from the emotional interpretation, you regain complete control. You stop pathologizing every sensation in your body. You realize you are a complex system, not a flat label, which creates a seamless transition into the final load-bearing wall, Pillar 4, title.
Non-chips and fluid identity.
I'm going to call it right now. This might be the single most liberating concept in the entire framework. It completely changes how you talk to yourself.
It really is. It's about moving your identity from a permanent verdict to a temporary state. Think about the language we use every day. When you say, I am an anxious person, or I am a procrastinator, or I am bad at math, you are using a fixed noun.
You're declaring a permanent structural identity.
Right. You are telling your brain that this is who you fundamentally are.
And your brain listens. If you tell it you are a procrastinator, it will make sure you act like one to maintain consistency. But a non-chip reframes that entirely. Instead of a permanent identity, it becomes a temporary mode you are visiting. So instead of saying, I am an anxious person, you say, I am currently in anxiety mode.
I'm in procrastination mode.
Yeah.
I'm currently in overwhelm mode. I'm in beginner mode.
The relief that comes with that slight language shift is massive, because if I am an anxious person, I'm broken, I need to be cured. But if I'm just in anxiety mode, well, modes can be switched off. You can transition out of a mode.
And from a neurological standpoint, this practice builds massive cognitive flexibility. It literally creates new neural pathways because it forces your brain to stop pathologizing your basic humanity.
Oh.
You aren't fundamentally flawed. You are simply a dynamic system occupying a temporary state.
So we have these 4 load-bearing walls: truth, target, totally, and title. How do they actually hold the roof up? The framework introduces Rule 3 to synthesize the architecture.
Yes. Rule 3 is the interlocking mechanism. It demonstrates how these pillars are mutually constitutive, meaning they rely entirely on each other to exist. Let's look at what happens if you pull one away. A target without truth is just a delusion.
Yeah.
You're aiming your arrow at a goal, but you are lying to yourself about where you are standing to shoot it.
You want to be a marathon runner. That's the target. But you refuse to admit you haven't jogged in 3 years, which is the truth. You'll destroy your knees on day 1.
Exactly. And truth without totality is an oversimplification. You might be honest about a flaw, but if you don't see the multidimensional context of why that flaw exists, you just end up punishing yourself. You're being honest about only a fraction of the picture.
And totality without flexible titles is overwhelming chaos. If you can see all the complex, multidimensional layers of your life, all the traumas and the triggers and the intersecting pressures, but you are rigidly identifying with all of them permanently, like I am my trauma, I am my stress, you will drown in the complexity. You need the fluid title to surf over the totality. You need all 4 pillars to stand strong.
So the foundation is poured. The walls are up. You have a new, stable psychological house. But a house doesn't just sit there. It needs electricity. It needs an operating logic to handle the day-to-day weather. We need to look at the actual mathematical logic of this new OS.
This is where we cross into the core mechanic. The massive shift from a baseline state known as R1V, moving toward the upgraded state of AV1. Let's deeply unpack this math because it is the engine of the entire transformation. The old code, the default mode for 99% of humanity, is R1V.
That equation stands for responsive 1 over variable. Let's visualize what that means. In this state, the external world, your workplace, the economy, the mood of your partner, the traffic, is the solid, unmoving constant. The world is the 1. And why you, your internal state, are the variable.
In R1V, you are nothing but a weather vane. You simply adjust to whatever room you walk into. Let's say you wake up in a great mood, you walk into the office, and your boss is visibly stressed, slamming doors, pacing. If you are operating in R1V, you unconsciously absorb that context.
You become the variable.
Suddenly, your shoulders are tight, you're snapping at your coworkers, you're stressed. You are a passive consumer of the context, constantly modulating your identity to fit whatever external reality demands.
And it's exhausting because you have no stable core. But the new code, AV1, flips the entire equation upside down. AV1 stands for autonomous variable over 1.
Okay, so what does that look like?
In this state, you become the stable reference point, the constant. You are anchored securely in your 4 pillars. You are the 1. And the external world becomes the variable that moves around you.
You generate your behavior from an internal architecture instead of pure adaptation. So let's take that same scenario. You walk into the chaotic office, the boss is slamming doors, but because you are the 1, anchored in your truth and your target, the chaos remains a variable outside of you.
Right. You observe it.
Using dimensional homonomy, realizing the boss is in stress mode, but it doesn't overwrite your internal code. You remain calm. You might even de-escalate the room because you are generating stability.
You are acting upon the world rather than letting the world act upon you.
Okay, wait, I have to push back here because this can easily be misinterpreted. If I am always the constant one and the world just has to adjust to me, how do we prevent this from becoming sheer narcissism or stubbornness? Let's use a real scenario. If my spouse comes home crying because they just lost their job, and I decide to remain an unyielding, autonomous constant who refuses to absorb their stress, I'm going to look like a sociopath.
Yes.
If I'm the constant, aren't I just ignoring the world and refusing to connect?
That is a phenomenal pushback. And it's the exact trap many people fall into when they first try to establish boundaries. They just become brick walls. But the architecture anticipates this exact problem by introducing a balancing mechanism called the inversion kick.
The inversion kick.
Yes, the AV1 state is not about being a statue. It's about dynamic equilibrium. And the inversion kick utilizes a triad: person, persona, and principle.
Break that triad down for me. How does it stop me from acting like a robot when my partner is crying?
The rule of the inversion kick dictates a balance between active control and automated surrender. It states that if you are personally controlling the content of a situation, the active engaged doing, you must allow the broader context to be handled by an automated principle. Conversely, if you are letting a principle dictate the action, you must be deeply emotionally present as a person in that context.
Okay, let's ground that in a real-world example so we can see the mechanics of it. Let's say I'm a manager leading a highly critical, tense team meeting.
Perfect. If you try to be the unyielding one in every single aspect of that meeting, if you try to control the emotional tone of every employee, which is persona, dominate the agenda, which is principle, and micromanage every creative idea, which is person, you will experience massive cognitive tunnel vision.
You burn out.
You burn out from the friction, or your team will completely shut down because you were too rigid.
You become a dictator, not an architect.
Right, so you use the inversion kick, you oscillate. Maybe for the first 20 minutes, you rely on the principle, the pre-planned agenda. Because the principles is handling the structure, you can show up fully as the person. You can be relaxed, empathetic, listening deeply to your team's concerns without feeling out of control.
Ah, I see.
Then, when a decision needs to be made, you invert. You step into the active persona of the decisive leader to make the call. But you let the principle of psychological safety maintain the context of the room.
It's a dance. It's like breathing. You inhale active control, you exhale and surrender to your own pre-designed systems. So when my partner is crying, I don't need to control their emotions, that's the variable, but I anchor into my principle of deep compassion, which allows me to be entirely present as a person without losing my own stability. I don't become a brick wall, but I also don't get swept away in their panic.
Exactly. You are highly fluid, deeply connected, but entirely autonomous.
Okay, so you have built the house. You've installed this fluid, autonomous AV1 operating system. You understand the inversion kick. You feel ready. You turn the page in the manuscript, expecting the next logical step in the theory, maybe a worksheet on how to apply AV1 at work, and the text does something incredibly jarring. Chapter 3 doesn't exist. You turn the page, and you are just staring at a massive Roman numeral I.
The scaffolding abruptly falls away. The author intentionally strips away the traditional chapter structure to signal a fundamental phase shift. We are crossing what is called the threshold of the known.
It is such a brilliant, visceral formatting trick. It physically forces the reader to realize that the safety of learning the theory is over. You can't just take notes anymore. You are now crossing into the chaotic territory of actually living it.
And the transition into this new phase is described with two very distinct, potent phrases. The vibe of this new reality is epically comprehensible and imperatively implicative.
I love the weight of those phrases. Epically comprehensible means it's not actually that complicated. The truth of it resonates in your bones once you see it. And imperatively implicative means that once you do see the truth of this architecture, the implications for how you must change your daily life are painfully, unavoidably obvious.
You can't unsee the matrix.
No, you can't go back to blaming the weather for your bad mood.
And standing at this threshold, before you enter the labyrinth of actual application, you encounter three terrifying, but deeply liberating revelations. These are the realizations that shatter your old, purely logical, rational map of the world.
Let's spend some real time on these because they challenge everything modern society teaches us. What is the first revelation?
Revelation 1. The mind is a translator, not the source. For our entire lives, especially in Western culture, we have been taught that our conscious, rational thoughts are the absolute command center of our existence. I think, therefore I am. We believe our thoughts originate reality.
Right.
But at the threshold, you realize the conscious mind is just a translation terminal. It is merely processing deeper signals, impulses, and environmental data that it didn't create.
It's like looking at a computer monitor and thinking the monitor is doing the computing. The monitor is just translating the electrical signals from the hard drive into visual pixels you can understand. Your thoughts are just pixels, which leads directly to Revelation 2. The body is not subordinate to the mind. The body is sacred, and it is highly intelligent.
We are conditioned to override our bodies constantly. We drink caffeine to push through genuine physical fatigue. We ignore our hunger cues to hit a productivity metric. We suppress the physical sensation of anxiety to appear professional in a meeting. We treat the body like a dumb donkey that the brilliant mind has to whip into submission.
That's so true.
But the reality is that the body is receiving and processing millions of bits of subtle data threats, safety, connection, long before the conscious mind even registers a thought.
If you walk into a room and instantly feel a knot in your stomach, your body has processed the micro-expressions of the people in that room, the tension in the air, the tone of voice, all before your mind has formulated the thought, something is wrong here. Respecting the body's intelligence is mandatory for the AV1 operating system.
Which brings us to Revelation 3, the most profound one. There is an unwitnessed force beneath both the mind and the body. An animating energy, a contextual field that connects the internal architecture to external reality.
The framework uses this concept of the holder and the held to explain this contextual field. I've been trying to visualize this. Is it sort of like the movie Inception, where you have dreams inside of dreams, layers within layers?
It's a natural comparison to make because Inception deals with nested realities. But Inception is about deception and escaping downward into the subconscious. The holder and the held is actually much more structural and grounded in waking reality. Instead of dreams within dreams, think of the literal architecture around you right now.
Okay, let's walk through that.
Imagine a doorway. That doorway is a threshold. But a doorway cannot exist in a void. It is held by a wall. The wall doesn't float in space. It is held by the structure of a room. The room is held by a building. The building is held by the foundation, which is held by the gravity of the earth. It is a nested architecture of support.
Right. Every level provides the context for the level below it. And the argument here is that the fourth dimension isn't time. The true fourth dimension of human experience is contextual meaning. It is the dimension of holding and being held. The context dictates the meaning of the action.
Precisely. Let's apply this practically. If you are trying desperately to change a habit in your life, let's say trying to stop endlessly scrolling on your phone late at night, you are staring at the doorway. You keep trying to force the door shut with sheer willpower. I just won't look at my phone.
But you fail every night.
Why? Because you aren't looking at the room that is holding the door open. What is the broader context? What underlying belief, what unacknowledged loneliness or burnout, is providing the context that makes scrolling necessary for your survival? You can't change the behavior of the door until you change the contextual meaning, the room.
And this raises the ultimate question for the listener. Why does all this dense, abstract, nested architecture matter to you? It matters because at some point in your life, you are going to hit a wall. You will hit a point where sheer effort and willpower stop working, a point where writing a new, rigid plan feels exhausting, positive thinking feels like a toxic lie, and pushing yourself harder just results in deeper burnout.
Yes, you hit the absolute limit of your legacy operating system.
Yeah.
And when you hit that wall, it feels like a massive failure. You think you are breaking down. But the framework reframes this entirely. It calls this state sacred confusion.
Sacred confusion. I love that.
It is the necessary mechanical breakdown of the old code right before a breakthrough. To successfully cross the threshold of the known, you have to surrender your desperate need for absolute certainty. You have to stop fighting the door, let go of the steering wheel that isn't connected to anything anyway, and step into the unknown.
Which brings us into the final major phase of our exploration today. The labyrinth of thought and the EXO formula. We have surrendered certainty. We have crossed the threshold. We are now wandering in the labyrinth of our own minds. How do we practically navigate this new shifting territory using our upgraded AV1 operating system?
We navigate it by mastering automation.
I want to go back to that smart home analogy from the very beginning because it is the key to this entire section. Imagine walking into a fully integrated, state-of-the-art smart home. You stand in the living room and you say, system focus mode. Instantly, the overhead lights dim, the ambient noise canceling hums to life, the temperature drops 2 degrees, and an instrumental playlist starts playing. That is physical, environmental automation. But what we rarely realize is that our brains are already running incredibly powerful psychological automation.
We are highly automated machines. You have deeply entrenched automated responses that were installed by your parents' anxieties, by the societal expectations of your hometown, and by past emotional traumas. You don't consciously choose to have your heart rate spike when your boss emails you at 8 p.m. It is an automated program triggering a biological response.
Yeah.
You don't choose to immediately apologize when someone else bumps into you on the street. It's an automated appeasement program.
To truly become the architect of your meaning, you must audit the psychological automation. You have to look at the code. And once you audit it, how do you reprogram it? The framework introduces the concept of state shift commands.
And we need to be incredibly careful here to separate this from self-help toxic positivity. A state shift command is not standing in front of a mirror, staring into your own eyes and shouting, "I am a confident, powerful millionaire."
Yeah.
When your bank account is overdrawn and you feel terrified, that is just the surface self trying to overwrite reality with a loud lie. The core witness knows you're faking it.
Right. It rejects the command because it fails the truth pillar.
Exactly. State shift commands are about using specific, carefully chosen language to trigger intentionally installed, realistic, automated responses. It's about shifting the mode, utilizing those fluid noun shifts we discussed earlier. You say, "I am entering focused execution mode." And because you have anchored that mode in your 4 pillars, your neurology actually shifts to accommodate it.
To make this entirely concrete, the source material introduces the engine that powers this transformation, the EXO formula. It calls this the unified field of transformation. Let's break down the actual math of the meta here.
The formula is beautifully simple, but endlessly deep. X plus 0 equals XO. X represents the action or the operators. This is the mechanical, physical thing you are doing in the real world.
Okay.
X, 0 represents the narrative, the core identity, or the context.
Yeah.
This is the story of who you are while doing the action, and XO is the result. Lived, embodied transformation.
Let's run a highly relatable scenario through the formula. Let's say you need to send a really scary, high-stakes email. Maybe you are setting a firm boundary with a toxic family member, or you are asking your boss for a long overdue raise, or you are quitting a secure job to start your own business. That email is terrifying.
Now let's look at what happens if you try to solve this using only X, focusing purely on the mechanical action. You grit your teeth, you pump yourself up with caffeine, you type out the email with trembling hands, you squeeze your eyes shut, and you hit send. You did the X.
But you haven't changed your 0. Your internal narrative is still running the legacy software of, I am small, I am an imposter, I am in trouble. So what happens? You spend the next 3 days in absolute physiological terror. Every time your phone buzzes, you jump. You feel nauseous waiting for the punishment you are sure is coming. You performed the action, but you didn't experience any transformation. You just tortured yourself.
Conversely, let's look at the other extreme. What happens if you focus entirely on the zero, the narrative, without the action? You read a bunch of books, you sit on your meditation cushion, you visualize yourself as a powerful, sovereign, boundary-setting executive, you do the breath work, you feel totally empowered and peaceful in your living room, but you never actually sit down and write the email.
That is just fantasy. It's spiritual bypassing. You feel great, but your external reality remains exactly the same. You are still underpaid or still dealing with the toxic family member.
But when you combine them, when you run the EXO formula, magic happens. You sit down to write the email. But before you type a word, you anchor into your AV1 operating system. You establish your truth. You clarify your target. You adopt the flexible title. I am currently in sovereign professional mode. You shift your zero. And from that grounded, transformed identity, you execute the X. You send the email.
And when you send it from that place of exo integration, you realize something profound. You realize that you are the kind of person who creates the internal conditions for your own courage. You don't have to wait to feel brave before acting. You construct the architecture that allows the action to happen naturally. That changes both your external reality and your internal self simultaneously.
It is the ultimate expression of being the architect. But to run the EXO formula day after day, you need a renewable energy source. You cannot run a high-performance vehicle without the right fuel.
And the framework outlines this internal fuel system through what it calls personalisms. The core sequence of this fuel system is desire leading to drive, which leads to direction. Desire, drive, direction.
It is a sequential ignition system. It starts with desire. What do you actually deeply want? Not what your parents want for you, not what society deems impressive, but your raw, authentic desire. If that fundamental desire is suppressed because you judge it as unrealistic or selfish or too late to achieve, the engine never starts.
If you suppress the desire, you'll have absolutely no drive. You will feel lethargic, apathetic, and unmotivated, and you'll wonder why you can't get off the couch. But let's say you acknowledge the desire and you generate drive. That's the energy. But if your drive is scattered, if you are trying to please everyone or chasing 3 different conflicting goals at once, your direction will be completely misaligned.
You will be pressing the gas pedal to the floor while the car is in neutral. You will hit a wall of exhaustion because you are burning massive amounts of energy without generating any forward momentum. Your personalisms, your desire, drive, and direction must perfectly align with your Pillar 2 target and your Pillar 1 truth.
This brings up the ultimate test of all this theory. How do we know when we've actually done it? When the 4 pillars are solid, when we are operating in AV1, when we are running the EXO formula perfectly and our personalisms are aligned, how do we know we aren't just deceiving ourselves again with a new set of fancy terminology?
You will know because your body will tell you. The framework describes the physical sensation of this profound integration. It is an undeniable, visceral click.
The click.
Yes, it happens when 3 specific layers of your existence lock into perfect place. Alignment with self, alignment with reality, and alignment with the field.
Let's break those 3 down. Self, reality, field.
Alignment with self means you are honoring what is functionally true in your own body and mind. You aren't suppressing your truth. Alignment with reality means you are deeply respecting the logistical, physical facts outside of you. You aren't wishing the weather was different, you are dressing for the rain. And alignment with the field means you are moving in cooperation with that unseen contextual force, the holding that we discussed at the threshold.
When all 3 of those layers lock in, you feel massive, undeniable momentum. It feels surprisingly, almost suspiciously effortless. It is the feeling of swimming downstream after spending your entire life fighting the current. And it contrasts so vividly with what most of us consider normal, the grind.
We all intimately know the grind. The grind is the friction that occurs when those 3 layers are out of alignment.
The grind is when you are trying to force an X action without securing the zero identity. The grind is fighting against the undeniable logistics of reality. The grind is ignoring your body's screaming signals of exhaustion to hit a metric on a UI dashboard. The grind is the ultimate defining symptom of a legacy operating system. But the click is the defining symptom of the architect.
The click is the exact moment you transition from fighting the architecture of reality to gracefully utilizing it.
Okay, let's zoom out and take a very deep breath, because we have traveled an incredible distance today. We started by looking at how most of us spend our lives hypnotized, staring blankly at the user interface, tracked by external audits, sleep scores, and buggy legacy code. We took the terrifying step of wiping the hard drive and ripping up the floorboards to look at the root OS.
We erected the 4 load-bearing pillars: truth, target, totally, and title, the requisite architecture necessary for any real, sustainable change to occur.
We shifted the underlying math of our psychological freedom. We moved from being a reactive variable blowing in the wind of other people's moods, that's R1V, to becoming an autonomous constant anchored in our own principles, which is AV1. We utilized the inversion kick to maintain connection without losing ourselves. We crossed the threshold, accepted the sacred confusion, and entered the labyrinth of conscious automation.
And we learned to utilize the EXO formula to merge our mechanical actions with our evolving identity, fueled by the aligned progression of desire, drive, and direction. It is quite literally a profound structural renovation of how you approach your existence on this planet.
And the most important takeaway for you, listening right now, the remote control is literally in your hand. You do not need anyone's permission to start this renovation. You don't need a certificate. The source code of your own mind is wide open. You just have to make the decision to stop pressing your finger against the glitching monitor harder and take the courageous step to start rewriting the underlying code.
As we wrap up this first part of our journey, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day, as you interact with your family or sit at your desk. If you are currently stuck in a mode in your life that is causing you deep, persistent suffering, ask yourself, who actually wrote the code for that mode? Was it you? Or was it an expectation you inherited a long time ago? And what exactly happens tomorrow morning when you finally realize that you have the administrator rights to hit delete?
Boom, root access. Thank you for joining us for part 1 of this deep dive. Now that the blueprints are drawn and the concrete of the foundation is poured, the real building can begin. We will see you in the next deep dive for part 2, where we start raising the walls.